It's been a while since we've had a cobbled together transient World Series champion. And who knows? Maybe the Angels are trying to create one of those title teams.
You are Locked On MLB, your daily MLB podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, baseball fans, and welcome to Locked On MLB, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. We're at your team every day. This is the daily podcast. We talk about all of Major League Baseball. I'm your host, Paul Francis Sullivan. Please call me Sully. Follow us on Locked On MLB Pods on Twitter or whatever it's called now. And on Instagram, I'm your pal Sully. I'm at Sully Baseball on Blue Sky, Sully Baseball Podcast on Instagram. This episode is brought to you by our good friends over at Gametime. Download the Gametime app and create an account and use the code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off your first purchase. The Angels have been unusually active this offseason. And pulling back the curtain, I am recording this a couple of days in advance. So for all I know, they've made a couple of more big moves since I've recorded this. But the fact that they brought in the likes of Yusei Kikuchi and Kyle Hendricks and Kevin Newman and Travis d'Arnaud and Jorge Soler to put together in their team shows that they are trying to at least cobble something together, throw a bunch of players together and see what sticks, to see if they can create a title team out of thin air. The Angels have to do something. The Angels have to do something for a couple reasons. They have gone 10 seasons without an appearance in the postseason, and that's hard to do because they've expanded the playoffs since the 2014 season. There are now 3 damn wild card teams. And in the COVID year, every team seemed to have a shot because it was, a 60-game season and all this other stuff. And even that situation where they famously had Mike Trout and Shohei Ohtani on the same damn team, and they still forget a playoff team. They can put a winning record on the field. Now, Mike Trout is not going anywhere. He is signed for 2025, 2026, 2027, 2028, 2029, and 2030. And he is being paid almost 38 million tomatoes each one of those years. As brilliant as Mike Trout is, and he is a first ballot Hall of Famer, he is the single greatest player of the 2010s. He is the greatest player in the history of the Angels. He is a generational talent who put together one of the best complete decades we've ever seen. But he's on the back nine of his career. He's unfortunately at the point of his career where you got to start thinking about him as being a DH or a first baseman. He is no longer the elite Mike Trout. And I think the sooner they take him out of center field, the better. But they can't have Trout play his whole career with the Angels and play a grand total of 3 playoff games. We've seen great players, all-time great players, never make it to the World Series. And the fact that Trout has never seen a playoff win, not a playoff series win, a playoff game win, is freaking tragic, which is why they are implementing this strategy of let's grab as many veterans as possible. I can't claim to be an Angels fan, but I can claim to be a Mike Trout fan. And I think him winning a title would be a good thing. And he's clearly going to win it with the Angels if he's going to win it because, quite frankly, he can't be moved. That being said, I think the Angels are trying to slap something together. They were burnt by the Ohtani thing, and I screamed at the top of my lungs during the 2023 season when it became clear that the Angels were going nowhere in an awful hurry. They either A, had to offer Shohei Ohtani the sun, the moon, the stars, or B, trade him. They either sign him a contract extension or trade him. And they did neither, which is stupid. But now they have Ron Washington as their manager. Things did not go well for the team last year, but how could things get worse? And again, it's the Angels, so maybe I shouldn't ask that question. But by putting together a bunch of veterans, they could have that sort of championship year. They're aiming for that championship year of teams that put together a bunch of transient players that you don't really associate with that team. And for one moment, like an eclipse, everything comes together. I've seen a couple of championships like that, and they're interesting because they're more remembered for the players who finally won their ring than for the fan base, because in almost all these cases, the team was blown up shortly afterwards. I specifically remember the 1987 Twins were one of the strangest teams I've ever seen win the World Series. And there were, to be sure, some twin lifers on that team, like Kent Herbeck, like Kirby Puckett. And there were players who came up through the Twins organization, like Frankie Viola and Tom Brunansky and Gary Gaetti and Greg Gagne and some of those players. But there was also a bunch of veterans. There were some former Twins who came back, like Roy Smalley and Bert Blyleven. It was Roy Smalley, who was an all-star many times over, won his only ring with that year. You had Joe Niekro on that team, who played for years and years and years and never got to the World Series, and he finally won his first ring with that team. You had Don Baylor, a former MVP. The late Don Baylor had former MVP, bounced around for a lot of great teams and could never be on a World Series winner, narrowly missing with the Red Sox the year before. He came in, won his lone championship with a Twin, and before the parade was over, he was on the A's. Steve Carlton was on that team, for God's sakes. You had, I mentioned Joe Niekro. You had veterans like Dan Schatzeder, who may still be pitching for all I know, who just were like these lifetime players who were transients and bounced around, and they all came together on that 87 Twins team, won, and then by 89, they were no good, and they were spread out all over creation. But for 1 year, they all came together. And a lot of transients, some lifelong Twins, as I mentioned, but a lot of veterans who you do not associate with the Twins wound up playing for that Twins team. You know, the Juan Berenguers of the world, who I would associate more with the Tigers and the Giants. A lot of these players who just came together. Jeff Reardon, coming over from Montreal, all came together for 1 year, and then boom, off they went. Boom, exploded. By the time they got to 1990, they were a last place team. Again, they won the World Series the next year, but that 87 Twin was like an eclipse. The 88 Dodgers were kind of similar to that. You had the superstar, Oral Hershiser, and you had lifelong Dodgers like Steve Sachs and Mike Scioscia. But you also had a lot of players who were cobbled from other teams. Obviously Kirk Gibson had his one great year in 88, but he came over the year before from the Dodgers, from Detroit. You had John Shelby, who was a lifelong Oriole. You had Mike Davis, who was a lifelong Oakland A. You had Jesse Orosco, who was with the Mets for all that time. You had Jay Howell, who was with the A's and Yankees beforehand. You had Alfredo Griffin. You had John Tudor, who was a Cardinal pitcher for all those years. All kind of came together for one. Ricky Horton, who was bouncing around all over the place in his career, all came together for 1 year. And then boom, off they went. You don't associate a lot of those players with the Dodgers, but they did win one. The 97 Marlins are like the greatest example of that, of a bunch of players who were assembled from different teams to win 1 year. They did. And then during the parade, they were dispersed across the league. No one associates Bobby Bonilla with the Marlins. No one associates Darren Dalton with the Marlins. Kevin Brown, Al Leiter. Sheffield did play 5 years there, but he was traded away right after that. People associate Edgar Renteria more with the Cardinals. And then you had Devon White, who people thought mainly with the Angels and with the Blue Jays. And Moises Alou, his lone year, his only year with the Marlins. He should have won the World Series MVP that year. Rob Nen showed up. He's off to the Giants. A lot of players like Dennis Cook got their only World Series ring with the Marlins. John Cangelosi, these people who play these super long careers, and they won their lone ring with the Marlins in a year where they were all put together for 1 year and then quickly dispersed. When the Diamondbacks won the World Series against the Yankees, it was one of the great World Series in baseball history. Now, they had acquired Curt Schilling, who played 2.5 years with the Diamondbacks before he was shipped off. But there were a lot of players on that team that you associate with other teams. Like Mark Grace got his lone ring there. Yes, you did have Luis Gonzalez and Randy Johnson, who people do associate with the Diamondbacks. But Steve Finley and, Reggie Sanders and Matt Williams and, Mike Morgan, who bounced all over Major League Baseball. You had a bunch of players who had these long careers who won their only ring with their quick cameo with the Arizona Diamondbacks, that cobbled together team. And oddly, another one is the Boston Strong team in 2013. Yes, they had Pedroia and Ortiz and John Lester and Clay Buchholz. And Jacoby Ellsbury. Okay, there's 5 players on that team who you think about as, lifer, as the bulk of their prime with the Red Sox. And Xander Bogaerts was a rookie on that team. But there were a lot of players there who were brought in that year and were out the door by the next. Johnny Gomes, Shane Victorino, Mike Napoli, Stephen Drew, David Ross, Jared Saltalamacchia, John Lackey, all came through, won, and off they went. Ryan Dempster. So many great players on that team were not on the 2012 Red Sox, and by 2015, they were gone. And yet they're a beloved Red Sox team. Johnny Gomes arrived at the beginning of 2013 and was in the playoff team for the A's the next year. Bouncing all over the map. Even Koji Uehara, who did play until 2016 with the Red Sox, but was just another cobbled together, grabbed piece. Those are strange title years. The 97 Marlins team is a bittersweet championship. It didn't really build any goodwill because the Marlin fans are so angry with how quickly the team was strip mined. But the 87 Twins and the 01 Diamondbacks and the 13 Red Sox were all cobbled together. Just grab whatever pieces you can. And they all lined up and worked for 1 year. Now, can it work with the Angels? I don't know, but it's been a while since we've had a title team like that. But the Angels have to address one big contract that isn't Mike Trout, and I have a strange proposal. Bear with me. The NFL playoffs are almost here, but it's not too late to get in on the regular season action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because right now new customers can finish the season strong with $250 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. Let me tell you something. This is a time when everyone gets into it, and I love to pick up a W, and, I bet on these games as they're going on. And guess what, folks? You do it so easily on FanDuel. It's all on one page. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. That's FanDuel.com for your chance at $250 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. I've said on this show that I don't like to carry the water for the owners, and I don't always like to talk about good contracts and bad contracts just on how they help the owners out. Just because a player put an MVP quality season together for a league minimum doesn't mean I call that a good contract. Sometimes a contract like that, you got to think from the player's point of view. And there are some contracts that you look at go like, wow, that did not work out for the team. And there may not be a better example of a player like that than Anthony Rendon. Rendon has gotten a lot of flack for this, that, and the other thing, mainly because his since signing with the Angels after the 2019 World Series, uh, he actually had his first year, the COVID year, he actually was pretty good. He actually had a decent year during the COVID year, but since then he's been an unmitigated disaster. Uh, he has yet to post 250 plate appearances in a season, and in the last since 2021, he has hit 7 home runs total over 3 seasons, and his all of his numbers are just cratering. And he has a reputation, earned or not, of being somewhat indifferent and or like picking up the money, and that's what it is. It's his job, and I'm sure he wants to produce well. I can't be in his mind. He's a former All-Star, former MVP candidate. He was a slugger in his time with the Washington Nationals. Was a big reason why they won the World Series in 2019, and he's it's not worked out. And he has 2 years left and is owed $77.1 million. And I mean, is he going to come back? I don't know, and neither do you. But I have a question to ask. He's owed about 70 something million dollars. Javier Baez is also owed 70 something million dollars from the Detroit Tigers. And while Baez, in his first 2 seasons with the Tigers, 2022 and 2023, were actually stayed on the field, his injuries caught up with him in 2024. And right around the time that his time on the field ended was also around the time that the Detroit Tigers kind of took off. He's got 3 years left on that contract at, being owed 70 something million dollars. Sometimes a change of scenery is what a player needs. And I propose swapping Anthony Rendon for Javier Baez. A change of getting out of a bad situation could be what both of these players need. Now, why would the Tigers do this? Well, when Rendon is healthy and on the field, he is a prodigious home run hitter. He hasn't been that since 2020, but still, it's possible that he could come back and be productive. And if he's not, they're going to have to pay the 70-something million dollars anyway. However, if they have Rendon, then they have to pay him this year and next, and then he's off the books. If they pay Baez, it's spread out a little bit, but they have to pay him this year, next year, and then the year after that. Take a chance with Rendon for money they're going to have to pay anyway. And if it doesn't work out, then the books are clean. Now, why would the Angels do this? Well, it's less money per year than they're going to be paying Anthony Rendon. And at least Javier Baez has shown he can stay on the, when he's healthy, and he played 144 games in 2022 and 136 games in 2023, there's a better chance that he will actually be on the damn field. And again, this was a player who not that long ago was a Gold Glove All-Star who was the runner-up of the MVP in 2018, the runner-up to Christian Yelich. And this was someone who, not that long ago, was an elite player. Now, it didn't work out with him. He played okay when he played half a season with the Mets. Off he signed with the Detroit Tigers, and it hasn't worked out. But would a change of scenery help both of those players? If the Tigers take a stab at Rendon and hope he comes back, if it doesn't work, well, then guess what? In 2 years, they're off the hook for money they're going to have to pay anyway. And maybe getting out of Anaheim and playing for a potential contender could be what they need. And for Baez, with all the talk, it's been a letdown, he's been a letdown, it's a new start. Shake the Etch-a-Sketch. Every once in a while that happens. Sometimes it works. Sometimes two players who are in a bad place can be swapped and they find their new life. At one point, the Yankees had Kenny Rogers, who was not fitting in New York, and the A's third baseman, Scott Brocious, was starting to flop. Well, they switched places, and Kenny Rogers was effective in his first year with the Oakland A's, and Scott Brocious became a World Series hero. Sometimes it works, and if it doesn't, well, then the Angels will be paying fewer dollars per year, and the Tigers will be out of a contract quicker. Now, when we come back, we're going to pay tribute to someone who was born on this day and a great what if in Chicago baseball history. Let's hear from our friends over at Gametime. You know, I've used Gametime. I got my tickets for the National League Championship Series through Gametime, and I may get some hockey tickets too. Gametime is focused on togetherness this holiday season, and that means when you bring people together at live events, the experience is just that much better, and it's the perfect gift. Gametime has a new feature called Gametime Picks that makes getting tickets for live events even easier. Gametime Picks filters out the fluff to get you only the incredible deals on great seats so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. You get the Gametime Picks. Curation is so much easier if you want tickets on sports, concert, comedy, theater, and more. All in prices. You get all your totals up front, no surprise fees at checkout. Seat views, you get a panoramic view from the seat in the app before you buy. Lowest price guarantee or Gametime will credit you 110% of the difference. In Gametime ticket coverage, your purchase is covered by the most flexible customer service policy in the ticketing industry. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem the code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off. Download Gametime today. What time is it? It is game time. Born on this day in 1941 in Riverside, California, Ken Hubbs was born. Now, unless you're a baseball historian like myself, you may not be familiar who Ken Hubbs was. Ken Hubbs was a super popular player for the Chicago Cubs when he came up in the early 1960s. And by 1962, he was the Rookie of the Year in the National League, and he became the first rookie to ever win a Gold Glove Award. And in his first two seasons, he was the best defensive second baseman in the National League and playing for a Cubs team that was really starting to come on its own. And this was a Cubs team where he was teammates with people like future Hall of Famers Lou Brock. He played with Ernie Banks. He played with Billy Williams. He played with Hall of Famer Ron Santo, and looked like he was going to become a fixture for the Chicago Cubs. And it was more than the fact that he was a dynamic defensive player on a Cubs team on the rise. He had kind of these aw shucks, he was very handsome. He was a member of the Latter-day Saints. And again, I don't care what religion you are. It doesn't matter to me. And I don't look at that as a positive or negative of you as a human being. But he was a really good influence on that Cubs team and actually apparently helped Ron Santo to quit smoking and really became someone who was quickly taken to the bosom of Cub fans. In 1963, he was 21 years old, playing in his second full season with the Cubs. And the Cubs had a winning record in 1963. Now, they were on the rise. They were on the rise, and they weren't as good as the Dodgers or the Cardinals yet, but they were putting together that team. Ernie Banks at first, Ken Hubbs at second, Ron Santo at third. You had Lou Brock in right field. Don't trade him. Billy Williams was in left field. And you had Dick Ellsworth was a 22-game winner. Larry Jackson was a solid pitcher for that team. And Lindy McDaniel was the best relief pitcher in the National League. And the team that was led by Bob Kennedy was slowly but surely putting together a winner. And heading into 1964, the Cubs looked like they were a team on the rise. And Hubbs was one of the big, marquee stars for the team. And then, Ken Hubbs got his pilot's license in 1964. And he was going to fly from California to Provo, Utah. And in a snowstorm, his plane crashed into a lake in somewhere in California, and then that was it. Actually, it was in Provo, Utah. He took off from California. He crashed in Provo, Utah, and Ken Hubbs died. And for his 2 years that he spent with the Chicago Cubs, there was a real sense of loss and devastation with his death. A lot of people felt that he was very much on the verge of developing into a solid hitter along with his Gold Glove defense. But beyond that, he was a good man who loved to sign autographs for kids, was a great influence on the other players, and his influence on the team could be felt, and his death was stunning. And that Cub team, which did put together a bunch of years with those Hall of Famers, eventually they traded away Lou Brock, but eventually they brought in Fergie Jenkins. But Ken Hubbs became a player who, for those of them who, the Cub fans and the Cub players who played alongside him, his loss was a seismic loss and was talked about for generations. Well, now the generations who remember Ken Hubbs are, fading out. And his effect is fading out, and his influence on the team is becoming something that has been appreciated by fewer and fewer people, until eventually he's going to be an obscure footnote in Cubs history. But that's one of the things we do here on this show, is we keep some of these names alive. Chances are some of you never heard of the name Ken Hubbs before, but you heard of Oscar Taveras. You've heard of Jose Fernandez. You've heard of Nick Adenhart. And you remember the impact when each one of those players with such great promise died way ahead of their time. That was Ken Hubbs. And so, if nothing else, we're going to keep his memory alive, at least for another day. So follow us at Locked On MLB Pods on Twitter, or whatever it's called now. And same handle for Instagram. I'm your pal Sully. I'm at Sully Baseball on Blue Sky, Sully Baseball Podcast on Instagram. Talking about Jigsaw Puzzle Championships, a potential trade involving 2 bust contracts, and remembering the late Ken Hubbs. This has been Locked On MLB for the 23rd day of December, 2024. I am your host, Paul Francis Sullivan. Please call me Sully.